Welcome to the Puzzle of Us podcast with Chelsea Peterson, your host, and hosting my husband Brett along with us today. And we want to talk to you guys a little bit today about setting goals, and with it being a new year, and a lot of times people don't think about setting goals as a couple and in a relationship and having relationship goals. And so we want to lay out kind of how it's worked in our relationship, as well as just kind of how we've done that in the past and throughout our relationship. So a little bit of an introduction to us, and maybe you can lead off with us, Brett, but tell us a little bit about us.
All right, yeah, so we've been married now for, at the time of recording this, for 15 years. We have lived in a whole bunch of places, moved, 30 times in those 15 years, something
I think
like
we're
that.
at 17 or 18.
I don't know, it was a lot. We have been through, I'm just going to list some stuff off. We've been through undergrad, 2 grad schools, working for other people, and now we own an
residency.
And we own and operate a couple different businesses now as well. So there's been a lot that we've done in our 15 years. We have 4 children, ranging from ages 8 down 9. She's 9 now, isn't she? Just turned 9. Down to like 8 months. So that's, I think that's pretty good intro, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I think just to give you, our listeners, a little bit of a background to us is really just we've had a lot of different experiences in life, and a lot of things that have not only we've had to individually be involved in, but are involved in together as a couple. And so Brett and I, as Brett mentioned, we own a couple different businesses as well. And so that is a whole nother aspect that has taken a different type of stress on our relationship. And we're going to speak to that a little bit. But we really have kind of gone through these different shifts in our relationship. And, at first we were married for quite a while without having kids. By choice, we chose not to have kids for a while. As Brett mentioned, we were in grad school and undergrad and finishing up school and those sort of things. And so we were married for about 6, almost 7 years before having our first child. And in that time, we did a lot of moving. We had a lot of experiences. We went on some great adventures. We lived in Alaska for a couple of summers, and it was really, really a great time. And we'd highly recommend doing stuff like that if you are newlyweds. But I think it was a really great opportunity for us to really establish supporting roles and what we're going to call initiators and supporters. And there have been times in our lives that one of us have been maybe a little bit more involved in things than the other person. Both of us are very active, very involved people, and want to continue progressing and pushing ourselves and challenging ourselves, which means that we're often involved in lots of things outside of our relationship.
So yeah, just to kind of lay that out, what we mean by that is when we first got our first year of marriage, we were both in grad school. Chelsea's a fair bit younger than me.
We were both in undergrad.
Undergrad, that's what I meant. Thank you. And she is a fair bit younger than me, but she was way further ahead in school than me, just due to the nature of how I do things. But anyway, so about halfway through that first year, Chelsea transitioned to grad school. She graduated undergrad and started into her master's in marriage and family therapy. And at that time, it was never really a spoken thing, but I went into more of a supportive role. Yes, I was still working, volunteering in some things, as well as doing schooling, but Chelsea's grad school just took a precedence in our relationship, and I went more into a supportive role for the next couple of years as she was completing that schooling. And And so there was just this kind of natural shift that happened. And then following that, when she graduated was right around the time that I got into my grad program as well. And so then that shift took place where Chelsea went into more of a working role, and there was more support in I was more of the initiator of needing the support, and Chelsea was in that supporting role. And it's gone back and forth numerous times as we've gone through these last 15 years.
Absolutely, and I think that it wasn't ever really a spoken thing, like Brett mentioned, that it would just kind of happen naturally. It started for us that way, but we've seen those shifts multiple times throughout our relationship, and it's not one person saying, okay, it's my turn to go do this. It's a kind of an opportunity presents itself, and we may both be kind of in a stagnant place for 6 months to a year or something like that. But then it's like, okay, let's someone will usually say, hey, I'm looking at, Brett's on ski patrol at Beaver Mountain right now, and a couple of years ago he was like, I really think that this would be a good opportunity for us, but it is going to require quite a lot from us, particularly in this first year. And so we sit down and we make those decisions together, and I never feel resentful of the fact that he's now I'm in more of a supportive role, or the times that I'm in more of the initiator role. Brett hopefully doesn't feel like he's drug along or has to be in that supportive role, because we've made that decision together. That's an important thing that I think as a couple, sometimes there can be couples or an individual in a coupleship that sort of becomes a dictation or becomes a dictator in that, like, no, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, and sort of pulls people along. And I think that's just an important side note, that isn't what happens in our relationship, and hasn't been what's happened. It is a mutually agreed upon decision of this is what we are going to do, and then naturally those roles just sort of fall into place, as someone is the one that's out kind of in the trenches doing the thing, and the other partner is really supportive of that. I talked about Brett being in ski patrol, and that first rookie year really was, there's a lot required, right? They're low man on the totem pole, and there's a lot of trainings, there's just a lot of things that are required. And at the time we had 3 kids, and one was an infant, and it was a strain for our family, but it was something that we went in together. And so I wasn't ever, I got tired sometimes, but it wasn't ever that resentful feeling that often can come up when someone feels like they weren't part of that decision.
Yeah, and I think a big purpose of this podcast today is new year, new goals, right? And when we have initiated these, like when we've had these transitions, there usually is goals, long-term goals that are associated with it. So I guess we're using the ski patrol example.
The ski patrol.
Let's do it. So with the ski patrol, a big thing for us was we both love being in the outdoors, and we want that for our children. It's been something that has shaped both of us, and we feel it a big part of who we are, and really how we want our own. We want it to be a big part of our children's lives as well. And as we have talked over the years, like, how do we foster this in our children? This opportunity came up for ski patrol, and I had known a number of family friends that they had been part of a ski patrol family, and they just grew up at the mountain. And not only did they have a love for skiing, but for many other outdoor activities. And I had seen that in other people, and I brought that to Chelsea. Now, I wish this was all altruistic, but there's a part of me that I love to ski, and this gave me, it forced an excuse for me to have to go up and ski. And I know people are like, holy crap, you have to go ski, but when you're in a busy part of your life like this, sometimes you need it's kind of forced me to go, instead of 1 or 2 times a year, I consistently get a go. So there is some selfish stuff to this, but there was a lot of, we had conversations that this would help our family goals of being able to raise our children in that way and bring them up in a fashion that we wanted to. And so there was a lot of discussion going into, here's the goal. We want our kids to develop this love and passion for the outdoors and learn and do all the things that develops. Here's the solution that together as a couple we can work on. And it was, as Chelsea mentioned, yeah, the focus is on me because I'm the one up there. But in those first couple of years, it was great for me. Like, it was a lot of fun for me. But now it sometimes feels like more of a burden on me than maybe for Chelsea. As we're getting the kids up there, our kids get to participate in a lot of things at the mountain, but there's a number of stressors that are now placed on me to be a part of Ski Patrol and continue doing that in order to provide this for the family. Did I lay it out all right?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, I think that's how that outlines for us a lot how we kind of determine what we do together as a couple, but also as a family, right? So like a lot of these goals of like, what do we want our family to look like? What do we want to be able to provide to our kids? And if, we want to be skiing, that also goes to like, how do I stay in shape enough to be able to actually enjoy skiing when we go skiing with the kids? So I feel like those like long-term goals also have a ripple effect into kind of our everyday lives as well. But there's other examples we could use as well, but the skiing is a good example of just that's the type of lifestyle we want to provide for our kids, and therefore we've made decisions and sacrifices and continue to make sacrifices and continue to make it a goal. But then it also goes down into that even to the daily grind of, I better work out today because we've got skiing coming up this weekend and I haven't done anything and I'm going to be totally wasted if I don't. So again, it's those little things that are part of a bigger goal, part of a bigger plan. And I feel like usually when one of us is sort of initiating or going into the trenches, that those bigger life goals, those bigger life plans are they're a part of that vision as well, and bringing each other along as well.
So I'm going to ask you a question, Chelsea. How, when you've been in the initiator role and I've been in the supporter role, what sorts of things did I do that you felt that support coming through?
When we were without kids and I was in grad school, as if anyone who's gone through it can be incredibly taxing and very time consuming, and there's just tons of requirements. Particularly in the program that I was in, there's a lot of after hours sort of stuff going on as well with doing therapy and that sort of stuff. And so I think back to that, and I felt like there was an equal workload. I still usually was responsible for kind of dinners and those sort of things, but it was you kind of also being supportive of like, what is for dinner? Can I help in some way? Can I bring you dinner? Do you have food? Like, just sort of even that checking in.
It's all based around food.
All based on food. If I'm fed, I'm good. I can keep going. So, but just like checking in with me of like, okay, well, I'd like to do this weekend, but I know you've got a paper to write. Like, how do I help support, the you getting that done, but how do we still do me time or do us time, or how do we still spend time together? And so I felt like that was kind of in the initial phases without kids, there was kind of that finding that balance of being supportive and communicating and checking in, like, what do you have going? What's on your radar? What homework do you have? What do you have going on? And then how do we work around that to still spend time together and enjoy one another? I feel like that was always really supportive and really helpful for me back then. And then even now, in kind of our various roles, just the little check-ins, and then the being really supportive of me time is really important for me right now. Like Brett mentioned, we have 4 children, 9 to 1, not even 1, 7 months, 8 months old, and little kids can be really needy and very taxing.
Well, speaking of shifts, having a new baby, definitely that shift, if it doesn't, it should shift to the mom in the relationship, because they have a lot to deal with. I've often felt kind of worthless in the first few months as a dad, because I can't do anything when the baby wants mom to get fed. The mom's the only one that can do it, and so that shift has definitely been there over the last little while, and I know that's something that's happened through, even when maybe some of that focus was on me being supported during, in a bigger sense, there had to be that shift when a new baby came along. So
yeah, and I think again that is a way that right now I feel very supported of. I play soccer once a week with a group of women. Brett's always, you're very supportive of like, when's soccer tonight? How can I help you? How can I help you get there? They play a pickup league on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. When we don't have a new baby and I'm not nursing and I'm actually getting sleep at night, you're usually very supportive of like, how can we make that happen for you? Which I feel very grateful for and very supported in that. That's something that we're doing together, and I feel seen, but I also feel supported in my own goals and supported in that. And so that's incredibly helpful for me, just to, in our phase of life right now, that's how I feel the biggest support right now. But I'll ask the same question back to you. How do you feel like I support you? What things have I done, or could other people take note of that have been helpful for you?
Yeah, holy smokes, where to even begin on this? As we're talking through this and reflecting on it, I'm like, man, I'm a selfish turd. Like, I feel like it's always been directed towards me.
And I don't feel that way at all, so there you go.
I mean, one example would be, I'll go into story mode. When I was in grad school we were living out in Connecticut, and I had, for my last semester, I needed to go on 2 clinical rotations. They were both 12 weeks long, and I had some really good opportunities back home here in Utah at some places that I was hoping to potentially continue on after school. Chelsea was still working and needed to wrap up, and we just so happened to be pregnant with our first kid. So my clinical rotations were supposed to start, what was it, like the 1st of January, I think I was supposed to start?
I think the 3rd.
3rd of January, whenever, right there at the beginning of January, I was supposed to start my first clinical rotation. They're very strict. You've got so many days, I needed to...
You have to get so many hours and so many days.
Yeah, and I needed to start. And so our first baby, she was actually due on the 29th of December.
31st, but...
Yeah. 31st. So I was basically going to have if she was born on her due date, I was going to have like 2 days. And Chelsea needed to stay back in Connecticut by herself with first new baby, mind you, just to wrap things up there. And I was going to go and do my first round of clinicals, and then she was going to come back out once everything got wrapped up. And just to, not that this part of the story really has anything to do with the goal of the podcast, but fortunately, our little girl, McCall, was born on Christmas Day on the 25th. So the nice thing is we did have the mercy of being able to spend a week with each other until I had to take off.
Yep, and she is our only baby that has come early. I think she knew that, like, mom could not do this completely alone, and she came early. The rest of our kids have come almost 2 weeks late. So she just knew.
She just knew.
She just knew, and she's just a Christmas baby. That's a side note and totally different. Again, not the goal of the podcast,
but all of that. We luckily had a week to spend with each other, but then I was gone. I shipped off, and for any military families out there, I know this is like just normal operating procedure, but for us civilians, it's not really a normal thing, and so. But with that, even though Chelsea was in this place all by herself, a long ways away from home, and we had a great support system out there in Connecticut, but there was a difference, and I wasn't around at all for those first few months. But the fact that she was willing to sign up for that and do that was amazing. I mean, I don't even need to say any more than that to show what level of support there was. She brought up the ski patrol, and there's a lot of nights that I'm gone, a lot of whole days coordinating with family and friends to watch kids as she's at work and I'm doing this volunteer thing. I coached lacrosse for the first 5 years of our marriage as well. That was a volunteer, hanging out with some of my really good friends, and she supported me all the way along. And so just her, the question was, how have I felt her support in this? Really just her allowing me to be freed up and not feel this, I know this is going to sound bad, but this nagging, like, what this thing's more important to you than me and our family. I've never really felt that with her, which I know not everyone feels that, and so that's been it has allowed me to really throw myself into those activities that I have that I've done, and yeah, it's been really good.
Yeah, and I think for us, again, I think that goes back to the goal and how that comes about, right? As being that supportive person, I never feel like, those hours spent on a lacrosse field coaching lacrosse was not a decision that you made by yourself, that it was a decision that we made together. Can our family do this right now? Is this a viable thing for us in our relationship? And I never felt like you chose that above us, and that has been tested a few times of like, are you really going to go do that? And our family has this thing going on. And, for the most part, when push comes to shove, I do feel chosen over that. I feel more important than that. And I know that. And that comes from, I think, having that foundation and that base is really what makes kind of being supportive or being in these supportive roles outside of our relationship makes it easier, because we feel that on the inside. We get that from each other on the inside. And I want to talk a little bit about, like, what do we do when we are together, and what goals do we have, not only on a big front, but just on the daily. And I think things like, again, those conversations are happening, that communication is happening, decisions aren't being made in a forceful way of like, I'm signing up for this and better get on board or see you later. Like, that's not how it's done at our house. And it's a very mutual, it's a partnership. It feels very much like a partnership, and some things that we do to help it feel like a partnership is mostly that communication.
Yeah, and to that point, I'm kind of chuckling about this, thinking back on things. I've got some acquaintances, or maybe even some friends. Hopefully, if any of them are watching this, they're not thinking I'm singling them out. But I definitely have acquaintances that I check in with Chelsea before I commit to do anything. Whether it's a personal activity, and I'm not 100%. In all this, we're obviously giving you the Instagram, like, pretty
You're great.
gussied up version of stuff, and it's not always perfect. But for the most part, if someone invites me to go do something, or I want to go do something, or there's an opportunity, I almost always go to Chelsea and say, hey, I've got this opportunity. Does it fit in our schedule? How do you feel about it? Rarely do I just call her up and say, hey, I'm going to do this thing. And I know some people kind of cringe at that thought, that they feel like they're having to ask their mother to go do this thing, or they're asking for permission, and that they don't have their own freedom. And for me, I've just never viewed it that way. And a large part of that is because of the way that Chelsea has responded to it. It rarely has it been, no, I don't want you to go just because I don't want you to go situation. It's, you know what, we've got this thing. And half the time I don't even remember, right? If there's an activity we've got, especially now that kids are here and all
Even
the
if
schedules.
it's in the calendar,
Yeah.
he doesn't remember.
And I am who I am, right? But just having that I think has allowed for us to be able to achieve these goals, whether it's a personal, I want to go do this thing. As we've talked about in other podcasts, I really enjoy going hunting in the fall and spending some time by myself and just getting some solitude, and what that does for me. That helps me with my own personal goals. But I've never really, and I wouldn't say never, I really do try to make sure that it fits within the framework of our schedule, and I think that's been helpful for us achieving that goal of staying, just not having those issues that I know some other folks do.
Yeah, and I think I've never felt like he's checking in with me because I'm his mom, or because I can I go do this, or he's not really asking permission. Like that's not how he approaches it, and I've never felt that way. I mean, sometimes it'd be like, oh, I gotta ask the boss, or things like that. But it's done more out of respect for us, and I see it that way, and that's how I feel it. And even with the side comments of, well, I gotta ask the boss, or she really wears the pants, or whatever it is, like those side comments just really they don't bother me, because I know he knows that it's a mutual thing. I'm just the schedule keeper. It just is. And so if I know that there's something on the schedule, it tends to be more of like, hey, this is happening, or hey, I've got this going on, no, you can't go do that, or hey, we got to figure out a way, we got to adjust, or if you can help me find someone to watch the kids, or if you can help me with this thing, we were doing this first, we had this project going on, or we had this scheduled, if you can help me with this, then you can, or those sort of things. And so it just, again, I've never felt that like he's asking permission, or he's viewing me as, well, I've got to ask for permission so that I can get away from this, ball and chain or whatever. Like that's not how I have pictured it. It's come across more as more of a respect, out of respect for us and our relationship, and out of respect for me, I'm going to ask. And again, sometimes it's like, I don't care if you go do that. Why are you asking me? But again, for the most part, it's very, very appreciated, and I know that it's coming from I know the intention behind it.
So kind of to shift gears here a little bit, not only are we a partnership as husband and wife and romantic partners, but also we are partners in business. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm smirking at this because we have not always done this part right, no. But I just want to kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about what you feel we've done successfully to be able to manage that difference between being partners in our family and partners in a business, and how we've been able to separate those goals and still achieve both of them while still loving each other and enjoying being around each other.
Yeah, that hasn't always been the case. Like we said, we own a couple businesses, and so I feel like we wear a lot of different hats, right? We wear the intimate partner hat. We also wear the mom and dad hats. We also have, the parenting hats, but then we also have the boss hats. And it's kind of knowing that place of and clearly defining those roles in that. And when roles have not been clearly defined in like, okay, where are you coming at from this, or you're telling me how to run my business, or those sort of things, then things haven't always been so great. But once the roles, I feel like, are clearly defined, and I feel like we've done a better job at that. We haven't always been good at that. But once roles have been clearly defined, and once we've been able to set up boundaries, just to give you a glimpse into a little bit of storytelling from my end here is I would go to work when we first started Cache Valley Counseling. It was primarily, my business, and physical therapy was Brett's business. And in Cache Valley, where we are, therapy and mental health and couples counseling has just taken off. It's just been a very organic growth that has happened with the clinic. And I started this with just me. And so I would do all the intake phone calls, I would do all the paperwork, I would do everything. And then I would do therapy, and then I would take payments from people, and then I would reschedule them, and I would do it all. And people would still be calling while I'm in the middle of a session with somebody. And so there was a lot to manage right from the get-go for me. And at the same time, Brett is also, working for himself, trying to get his physical therapy business off the ground and up and running and all of that sort of stuff. And that has morphed into a whole new thing, and a whole new, we'll talk about that on another podcast, I'm sure. But for me, it was very, very stressful to just go to work. We'd also just had our second baby. So we had a almost 4-year-old, and we did have a 4-year-old, and we had a new baby at the time that all of this is happening. And it was a lot.
And we were living in my parents' basement.
And we were living in Brett's parents' basement, which we were very, very grateful for. But I felt very taxed all the time. And so we would come home, and I would have been at work for 8-10 hours, gone most of the day, and I would come home, and Brett would want to talk about the nitty-gritty of marketing and how do we get his business off the ground, and what do I need to do, and I need more support writing a book or whatever he was doing. And I just remember being completely overwhelmed, and I couldn't emotionally do those conversations at 10 o'clock at night once kids are in bed.
And so Chelsea laid out her side of things. She's been emotionally tapping into people's relationships at work, in the therapy clinic. She's all tapped out. I've been sitting at home doing office-based work. And as Chelsea mentioned, we're actually going to do a podcast or two about the differences, but my brain just was constantly going and wanting more and fed and enthused by all of this and energized. Chelsea could care less about her brain gets fired up and excited when she's sitting in front of clients and helping them work through things. Mine is kind of that entrepreneurial brain that is constantly going and thinking, and I needed an outlet. And anyway, long story. We'll dig into this a little bit more, but yeah. She would come home, and as I sit back and reflect on it now, a couple years later, holy crap, I can only imagine how she felt coming into this, and me being charged up and ready to go at 9 o'clock at night to have a 3-hour conversation where I'm just all animated and energized, and what do we do here? What do you think about this and that? And Chelsea's like, let me go to bed.
He's whiteboarding these things out, and like, okay, well, we need to do this, and we need to do that, and then we need to get an email sequence, and then we need to do this, and we need to do that. And I'm like, completely tapped, and it just again was incredibly taxing, not only for business side of aspect of things, but also for our relationship, because were times that Brett felt like you don't even care, and you spend all of your emotional energy outside of our relationship, and then you come home and you have nothing left for us. And it wasn't that I didn't have anything left for us, I just didn't have anything left for the business. And I wanted to like push pause. And so we've had some struggles in being able to really say like, this is time out, like I can't go there right now. And that has created different areas of our relationship, being in a business and being co-owners of businesses, and having different ideas. Oftentimes, luckily, we are often on the same page. How we get to that end result sometimes looks a little different, but again, that's where that navigation kind of takes place. And
I really think the important thing was, I don't know, it was probably 2 or 3 years ago maybe, that you finally got it through my thick head that there's us and then there's the business side of us, and we need to separate those. They cannot be combined together, which was really a turning point for us. And since that time, I feel like we have been able to, family-wise, we are very set and clear on where we're going and our goals, and we've done a great job, well, at least a sufficient job heading that direction. Business-wise, it's separated, and we're also able to really focus in on what's our goals. All right, here's our business time. Let's go work on them.
yeah, and that's also, I'm just chuckling a little bit because I'm remembering actually when there was this clarity for me in that we had planned a date night for the two of us and prioritizing our relationship, right? And we went on a date, just the two of us, and we literally I felt like nothing to talk about because I made the business off limits and we couldn't talk about the business. And before we went, I said, I cannot do business conversations. I cannot do how we're running credit cards or whatever. Like, I cannot have those conversations. So let's go spend some time together. And it was kind of awkward. I was sitting in Olive Garden. We went to Olive Garden, and
I remember this.
We had this kind of awkward conversation of like, what do we talk about? If we don't talk about the kids, we don't have on the parenting hat, and we don't have we don't put on the business hat, like, what do we have to talk about? And we have a lot to talk about, and we usually have way too much to talk about. But that was kind of a realization, and I think a realization and kind of a turning point for you of like, okay, yeah, this is important. If we want to keep liking each other, particularly outside of business decisions and raising family, we have to spend some time on us. And so, that also took some give on my end too. I don't like the business conversations. I don't like the marketing and the other business side of things. That I like seeing people. That's what I do. That's what I love, seeing people in therapy. I love sitting in front of people. I love being a part of that change that they make, and that's really what I enjoy about going to work. And I had to give up some of that time to be able to create space to have some of these much needed conversations about the business and about how do we grow it, and do we want to grow it, and what does that look like, and what do we need. And I had to give up some of my time for that, and Brett had to give up his 10 o'clock at night kitchen conversations that were 3 hours long. And so it's a give and a take, and it's finding that balance of what works for you in your relationship. And as Brett has alluded to, we are going to be doing a podcast, a different podcast from the Puzzle of Us podcast, and I guess we're kind of introducing it now, but it's going to be focused on this entrepreneurial relationship and being married to someone who is an entrepreneurial mind that never shuts off. Like, Brett is going from the time he gets up, and he is constantly going and has a really hard time just shutting off and just being. And that's okay. It's great for an entrepreneurial sense, but it sometimes is difficult to be married to, and we've navigated some of those. And so we are going to do a podcast on that. So if you are listening to this and you're like, oh, that kind of sounds like us, be sure to tune into that. It's forthcoming, but we're excited about that. But
so just to kind of wrap this, Chelsea, what would you say are the top 2 or 3 takeaways for couples setting and achieving goals, whether that's explicitly setting goals or more kind of how we have been more of an implied goal?
Yeah, I feel like we are not the best examples. I have clients who are actually better about like sitting down and having formal process goals of like, this is our goal this week as a couple, or this is our finance goal, or this is our, and I feel like we are not the greatest about setting those very explicit goals, but it's more of the implicit goals that we set. And I think that that's, as long as that continued conversation is happening and that communication is happening, I think that's the most important part for people. And it is totally okay to do that. That is very successful and works for couples. And that has had to be how we've done it in our business relationship, as we've had to set specific goals and come back and check in on them and look at our progress and measure our progress. And you certainly could do that in a relationship, and it would be very helpful. But that's not how we've just naturally, not how we have done it in our own relationship. But we certainly make space for that conversation to happen and those transitions and shifts to happen. And I think for us and our relationship, it's been good because it's been an implicit thing. It's just been kind of a natural thing that has happened. But for some people, it's not that way. And so making it explicit, sitting down and talking about it is okay too. Yeah. What have you been your takeaways? What advice would you give to people in our situation about goal planning or goal setting?
Yeah. I mean, I think for myself, I do set out, I've got a vision of, they're not necessarily a written down goal, but I've got a vision for where I want to go with certain things, and being able to understand that, create some space that for myself that I can process that, and then just line out the steps to get there, which that's goal setting, right? You've got your long-term goal, and then what are the little steps to get there? So being able to have some clarity for myself to then take that to our relationship, I think has been the most successful thing. That it's taken me years to learn this, how to transition that into our relationship. So that would be probably my biggest takeaway from
yeah, and I
this.
think that again, those conversations, continued conversations, do we sit down and really like write out our goal, like this is the type of family we want to have, or this is how we want to raise our kids? But it's in those conversations of like, this is the visions that we have. These are, the things we want for our children, or we want for our family, or we want for each other. And in those conversations, again, it's not a formal written out goal that we see every day walking out the door or anything, but it's sort of the vision of who we want to become and the relationship we want to have. And as we talk about that, we sort of know which levers to pull and what adjustments need to be made to make that happen. And I think it's an important thing, and a vision or a board planning session as a couple can be incredibly helpful. Again, formal or not, sitting down and getting pictures and all of that sort of stuff can definitely be an activity you do together as a couple or as a family, but having those conversations and working towards them, I think is the takeaway for everybody. So
I think that's perfect.
Great. Well, thanks for listening to The Puzzle of Us, and this is Chelsea, your host, and join us next time.